On that snowstorm night, a retired paramedic thought he was just picking up a lost puppy, shivering by the side of the road. He had no idea that from the blood on the ice to the howl over the lake, the little body in his arms wasn't a pet at all, but a wolf carrying one of the rarest ancient bloodlines on Earth, and the only thing pulling him out of his war nightmares. When the hero dog video of it saving his neighbor's grandson went viral, the whole town, the law, and wildlife groups descended on his tiny lakeside cabin. They all came to take the animal away, until the black bear showed up. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. The storm had been building all afternoon, pushing low gray clouds over Iron Lake until the world turned the color of old tin. By dusk, the county road was already a white tunnel, snow swirling in the headlights of Michael Carter's beat-up pickup as he crawled the last few miles toward his cabin. He kept one hand on the wheel and one eye on the temperature gauge. The radio hissed in and out between bursts of static and an AM host talking about rising heating bills and health insurance costs, but Michael barely heard it. Nights like this still made his shoulders lock up, remembering flares on an icy interstate, remembering the weight of broken bodies in his paramedic days. He'd moved out here to forget. The weather never let him. A gust hit the truck broadside, shoving him toward the ditch. He eased off the gas, swore under his breath, and rounded the last curve before the turnoff to his place. That was when he saw it. Something dark smeared across the pale shine of the frozen ditch. At first he thought it was a shadow from a road sign. Then his headlights caught the color. Red, a long, uneven streak of it, frozen into the crusted snow, trailing down from the edge of the road toward the lake. Michael's foot moved to the brake before his brain even caught up. The truck slid a few feet, tires crunching, then stopped with a low groan. The wind screamed around the cab as he sat there a second, fingers tight on the wheel. He knew what blood on ice looked like. He'd seen more of it than he cared to remember. "Damn it," he muttered, and killed the engine. The cold hit him like a wall when he opened the door. The air had that metallic burn that stole your breath and made old scars ache. Michael yanked his parka tighter, pulled a knit cap down over his ears, and stepped into the knee-deep drift at the roadside. Up close he could see it clearly. A splash of dark, rusty red where something had hit the snow hard, then a drag mark, thin but steady, leading down the embankment. Around the stain were tracks, prints from something big, heavier than a dog, the toes splayed wide. Wolf, maybe. Or a big stray. The storm was already softening the edges, trying to erase the story. He cursed the way his training woke up inside him, the part of him that couldn't drive past an accident, that cared more about bleeding than about mortgage refinance, rates, or whether his old cabin's home insurance would cover a fallen tree. That part of him never retired, no matter how far into the woods he ran. Michael followed the drag line down, boots punching through the crust. The slope dropped toward the frozen fringe of Iron Lake, where cattails stuck out of the snow like broken fingers. The wind picked up as he reached the bottom, shoving needles of ice into his face. He squinted, tracing the messy trail toward a low shape half buried beside an old, half-collapsed storage shed he'd never bothered to tear down. "Hey," he called out, more habit than hope. "Anybody there?" The only answer was the wind rattling the sheet metal roof. He trudged closer, heart thumping a little faster now. The dark lump against the snow shifted, just barely. For a second, he thought it might be a raccoon or a fox. Then he saw the tiny paws. It was curled in on itself, a ball of wet black fur no bigger than a coffee mug, sides quivering with shallow breaths. Snow had crusted along its back, clumping the fur into spikes. One ear was bent, pressed tight to its skull. The other twitched weakly when his shadow fell over it. "Easy," Michael said, dropping to one knee. His voice came out softer, the way it used to in the back of the ambulance at 3 in the morning. "Easy, little guy. It's okay." He slid his hands under the small body. The fur was stiff with cold, and underneath it there was almost nothing, just bone, skin, and the frantic flutter of a tiny heart. It made a thin sound, not quite a whine, not quite a cry, and nudged its nose against his thumb, searching for warmth. "Where the hell did you come from?" he murmured. Up close it looked like a puppy, maybe some kind of husky mix, all black with a faint gray sheen along the back, paws too big for its body. Its eyes were only half open, cloudy blue. Someone's careless Christmas gift, dumped when the novelty wore off? Out here, in this storm? He adjusted his grip and felt something tacky on his glove. Blood. But when he checked the little body, he couldn't find any open wounds, just a faint, half-healed scar along one flank. The drag line in the snow, the heavy tracks, the splash of blood up by the road, they didn't match this fragile thing in his arms. "Not yours," he said quietly, looking back toward the road. The larger prints vanished into the swirling white, already fading. Whatever had left them, and the blood, was gone. For a moment Michael stood there, the storm clawing at his back, the puppy shuddering against his chest. Every rational part of his mind told him to wrap it in his coat, call the county shelter in the morning, let someone with a real budget and liability coverage take over. Let the animal control officers and their paperwork and their personal injury lawyers handle the risk. But he'd felt that tiny heartbeat. He'd heard that thin, desperate sound. He couldn't leave it on the ice. "Okay," he said at last, more to himself than to the little creature. "One night. We get you warm. We see what tomorrow looks like." He tucked the bundle against his chest, turned his back on the dark smear in the snow, and climbed the slope toward the waiting truck, the wind shoving at him like an angry hand. Behind him, the drag mark and the heavy tracks blurred under fresh flakes, the storm swallowing the only signs that something bigger, something bleeding, had been there at all. By the time Michael pulled into the short drive and killed the engine, the wind was shrieking through the trees like something alive. The cabin squatted in the darkness, just a low roof and a chimney coughing weak smoke into the storm. For years it had felt less like a home, and more like a bunker where he stored his tired body between winters. Tonight it felt like a race against the clock. He shoved the door open with his shoulder, still cradling the little bundle of fur under his coat. The heat from the wood stove hit him in a wave, thin but blessed. He nudged the door shut with his boot, shook off the snow, and moved straight to the old kitchen table. "There we go," he murmured, laying the puppy gently on a folded flannel shirt. Its paws splayed, body limp for a second before it pulled itself into a shiver. Years of training slid back into place, almost a reflex. He checked breathing, gums, pulse. He warmed a towel in front of the stove, wrapped the little body, and held it close, feeling the trembling slow just a little. The tiny heart beat frantically against his chest like a trapped bird. "You're colder than a tax collector," he said softly. "Hang in there." He dug through a cabinet, found the dusty can of puppy formula he kept just in case, and a rubber-tipped syringe from his paramedic kit. On the counter nearby, a stack of old envelopes waited. Medical bills, mortgage notices, a life insurance allotment with his late wife's name still printed in bold. He pushed them aside with the back of his hand. Tonight there was only one patient. He warmed a cup of water, mixed the powder, tested it on his wrist the way he had once done for his daughter's bottle. When he eased the syringe to the puppy's mouth, it fought weakly at first, then latched on, swallowing in tiny, desperate gulps. Milk dribbled down its chin. It made that soft, hiccuping sound that pierced him straight through. "Good," he whispered. "That's it. Keep going." Outside, the storm rattled the windows. Inside, the only sounds were the crackle of logs and the wet, steady sip of a creature that had decided it wanted to live. Michael sat in the old rocking chair near the stove, the puppy tucked against his chest, towel and flannel bundling them both together. The chair creaked the same way it had when he'd rocked his daughter after a fever. He stared at the flames and tried not to think about the night sirens, the glare of headlights on ice, the way cold air could steal a voice mid-scream. At some point his chin dropped to his chest. He wasn't sure how long he drifted, but he knew exactly what woke him. The crash of metal, screaming tires, the heavy, impossible silence right after. In the dream, he was back on the interstate, kneeling beside his wife's crumpled car, his gloved hands slick with blood, the radio squawking about detours and traffic and the need for more units. His daughter's eyes were open, fixed on his face, as if asking why the man who saved strangers couldn't save his own family. He jerked awake with a hoarse shout, heart pounding, lungs clawing for air. For a second he didn't know where he was. The cabin walls leaned in, the dark corners crowding his vision. Then something small moved against him. The puppy had wiggled itself higher, nose pressed under his chin, paws spread across his chest. Its body was warm now, solid, breathing slow and deep. When he tensed, it let out a tiny sound, half yawn, half sigh, and pushed its head harder against his throat, as if to say, "Stay here. Stay now." Michael's breath shuddered out. His hands, still shaking, settled around the little body. The smell of formula and damp fur replaced the metallic tang of memory. The sirens faded. The highway disappeared. He was just a tired man in a quiet cabin, holding on to a heartbeat that wasn't his. "Okay," he whispered, voice rough. "Okay, kid, you win." The storm wore itself out toward dawn. The wind eased to a low moan and snowflakes drifted lazily past the window. Michael stepped outside just long enough to bring in more wood, then came back to find the puppy sitting up on the flannel, blinking at him with cloudy blue eyes that seemed a little clearer. "Well, you made it," he said. "Guess you're my problem now." It wobbled toward him on oversized paws and promptly tripped, sliding nose first into his boot. He laughed, a short, rusty sound that surprised him, and scooped it up. "Rook," he said suddenly. The word felt right in his mouth. "You look like a rook. Little piece on the board nobody pays attention to until it changes the whole game." Rook yawned wide, showing a row of tiny, needle-sharp teeth, then curled against his palm and went back to sleep. Later that morning, a knock sounded at the door, 3 brisk raps that could only belong to one person. Michael opened it to find Nora Jensen on the porch, cheeks red from the cold, a covered dish in her gloved hands. "Thought you might need a decent breakfast," she said, brushing past him like she owned the place. Man can't live on canned soup and instant coffee forever, no matter what the commercials say. You look like some of those poor folks in the Medicare ads. Her gaze fell on the bundle in the chair, her eyebrows climbed. "Well, I'll be," she breathed. "You finally got yourself some company that doesn't come in a bottle." Michael started to explain, but Rook chose that moment to stretch and squeak, paw batting at the air. Nora's face softened in a way he'd never seen. "He's the best thing that's walked into this cabin in years," she declared. "Don't you dare argue with me." Michael didn't. He just looked at the little creature that had dragged its way out of the storm and onto his chest, and felt for the first time in a very long while that maybe the world hadn't finished with him yet. Winter didn't end so much as sag into a different kind of cold. The storm that had nearly buried Rook became just one more line in the long calendar of northern Minnesota, and the days began to stretch, a few more minutes of gray light at a time. Inside the cabin, change came faster. Rook grew like something out of a time-lapse video. One week he could curl into Michael's palm. The next, he filled his lap. By the time the snowbanks along the road turned from white to dirty gray, the little puppy was leggy and rangy, his paws almost comically large, his chest deepening in a way that made every old dog picture in Michael's memory look small. "You're not exactly a toy breed, are you?" Michael muttered one morning as he watched Rook inhale 2 full bowls of kibble and still lick the rim like it owed him money. Nora noticed too. She stopped by with a casserole and a stack of coupons one afternoon, squinting at Rook as he trotted across the floor. "He's shot up like a teenager," she said. "You sure you don't need a second job to pay for dog food? Could always call that lawyer on TV, the one yelling about accident settlements and protecting your family's future. Lord knows half this town pays more attention to that than to their life insurance policy." Michael snorted. "I think we're fine, Nora." But even he had to admit there was something odd in the way Rook filled out. His legs weren't clumsy. They were sure, the way an athlete's are sure. When he moved, it wasn't the bounce of a house pet. It was a smooth, economical glide, each paw placed like it mattered. They started walking down to Iron Lake every afternoon, once the worst of the ice storms passed. Michael would tug on his worn coat, Rook would dance at the door, and together they'd pick their way along the narrow path between spruce and birch, the air sharp enough to bite. The lake lay flat and white, a sheet of frozen pewter stretching to the tree line. Snowmobiles had cut tracks across it earlier in the season, but now it was mostly empty, the ice creaking in low, complaining tones. Sometimes Michael threw a stick just to watch Rook run. The dog, he still told himself dog, would explode forward, a black streak against the white, covering distance far faster than made sense for his age. When he turned, his body carved a clean arc, muscles bunching under the winter-thick coat. More than once, watching him, Michael thought of the home security commercials he'd seen late at night, the ones promising peace of mind with cameras and motion sensors. "I don't need a system," he told Rook one evening as the animal loped back across the snow. "I've got you." It was near dusk the first time he heard it. They were standing at the edge of the lake, Michael with his hands pushed deep in his pockets, watching the sky turn from pale blue to bruised purple. Rook stared across the ice, ears pricked, body held strangely still. The hairs along his spine rose, not in fear, but in a kind of listening. "What is it?" Michael asked. Rook didn't look at him. He lifted his head, opened his jaws, and let out a sound Michael had never heard from him before. It started low, a rumble in the chest, then climbed, stretching into a long rising note that poured out over the ice and into the trees. It wasn't a bark or a whine. It was a howl, full, clear, and ancient, the kind of sound that made something buried deep in the human spine sit up and remember that once, long ago, you were prey. Michael froze. The air seemed to tighten around him. For a heartbeat, it was just Rook's voice, sliding up into the sky. Then, from the far tree line on the other side of Iron Lake, an answer came. A second howl, then a third, layered and distant, carrying across the frozen water like sirens. A chorus rose from the dark pines, high, low, overlapping calls that spoke of territory and hunger and snow. Rook went silent, listening, then answered again, his own voice threading into theirs as if he'd been born to it. The hair on Michael's arm stood up under his coat. "Rook," he said quietly, "that's enough." It took a moment, but the animal finally dropped his head and glanced back, eyes glowing faintly in the fading light. For a second, Michael saw something there that wasn't puppy soft at all. It was sharp and bright and wild, like lamplight reflecting off ice. On the way back to the cabin, Rook ranged ahead, turning often to check on him. Michael walked slower than usual, his mind snagged on the sound of that howl. He'd heard coyotes plenty of times over the years, thin yips in the distance. This had been different, deeper, older. That night, sleep came fitfully. Sometime past midnight, he jolted awake with the sense that something was wrong. The cabin was quiet, the stove a low orange eye in the corner. Rook wasn't on the rug by the bed. He found him at the window, front paws on the sill, staring out into the dark. The fur along his shoulders bristled. A low growl vibrated through his chest. "Hey, Usa," Michael said softly. "What do you see?" He stepped closer and peered out. The yard lay dim under a thin wash of moonlight. Beyond the clearing, the tree line crouched, black and patient. For several seconds he saw nothing. Then his eyes adjusted, and he made out shapes at the edge of the woods. 3, maybe 4 animals, just beyond the boundary where the yard light died, their silhouettes sharp against the snow. Too big to be foxes. 2, broad in the chest. One lifted its head. Moonlight caught a pair of pale eyes, watching the cabin. Wolves. One of them stepped forward just a few paces, then stopped. Its breath steamed in the cold. It threw back its head and howled once, long and low. Rook answered under his breath, a strangled, eager sound. Michael reached down and laid a hand on his back. The muscles were tight under the fur, vibrating with restraint. "Not tonight," he whispered. "You stay here." The wolves lingered a few minutes more, moving restlessly at the edge of the trees, then melted back into the darkness. Rook stayed at the window long after they were gone, ears pricked, tail still. The next morning, on his usual walk around the property, Michael found the deer. It lay near the far corner of the clearing, half buried in churned-up snow. The throat was torn, the hindquarters mostly gone, ribs picked clean and shining. Tracks circled the carcass, deep and spaced wide, the prints of a pack that had eaten well. He swallowed, the cold air burning his throat. He had seen plenty of scenes like this in the woods, but never this close to his own back door. Rook trotted up beside him, nose twitching. He didn't bark or whine. He simply stood there, looking at the carcass as if assessing someone else's work. "Stay back," Michael said, more sharply than he meant to. "This isn't for you." Rook ignored the tone and took a step anyway. That was when Michael saw it, a raw, pink line along the dog's shoulder, half hidden by fur. A fresh scratch, long and shallow, as if something with teeth had grabbed and missed. He knelt, fingers parting the thick coat. The wound wasn't deep. It was already scabbed over, the skin around it warm, but not hot. Still, the sight of it made his stomach twist. The deer, torn apart in his yard. The pack at the tree line. Rook's answering howls. And now this. Michael straightened slowly, looking from the carcass to the animal at his side, suddenly aware of how big Rook had become, how his head nearly reached Michael's hip. "You were out there last night," he said softly. It wasn't really a question. Rook met his gaze for a long moment, then bumped his nose against Michael's hand, as if asking for a scratch behind the ears. Michael obliged, fingers threading automatically through the thick fur. But the image of that fresh wound stayed with him, a quiet, nagging thought he couldn't quite push away. The storm had given him a puppy. Whatever he was raising now didn't feel like a puppy at all. Spring didn't arrive with flowers and birdsong. It came in dirty snowbanks and soggy boots, in the steady drip of meltwater from the eaves and the sharp crack of ice loosening its grip on Iron Lake. The surface went from solid white to a patchwork of gray, dark leads spreading like veins where the sun did its slow work. Nora's grandson showed up with the thaw. Jamie Collins tumbled out of the back of her sedan one Saturday. All long limbs and 2 big sneakers, his hoodie zipped up against the chill. Michael watched from the porch as Nora fussed with his hat. "He needed some country air," she called. "Too much screen time, not enough real life. Besides, you and that dog could use someone under 30 to liven things up." Rook trotted down the steps to investigate the newcomer. Jamie froze for a second, taking in the size of him, then grinned. "Whoa," he breathed. "He's huge. What is he?" "Rescue mutt," Michael said. "Answered an ad in the Snowstorm Gazette." The boy laughed, dropped to one knee, and held out a hand. Rook sniffed it carefully, then bumped his head under Jamie's fingers, accepting him without fuss. By noon, they were inseparable, Jamie throwing sticks, Rook bringing them back, both of them soaked and barking at each other in their own languages. In the afternoon, while Nora and Michael drank coffee at the table and argued gently about property taxes and the cost of heating oil, Jamie wandered closer to the lake. The top looked solid enough from a distance, a dull, pebbled gray under the weak sun. Closer in, there were patches where the ice had turned to dark slush around rocks and reeds, warning signs for anyone paying attention. Teenage boys, Michael knew, were not famous for paying attention. He heard the first crack as a faint, wrong sound under Nora's voice. A sharp, splintering pop, like a board snapping in half. Then came the yell, "Uncle Mike!" The mug slipped from his hand and shattered in the sink. He was at the door in 3 strides, Nora close behind him, her face draining of color. Down the gentle slope toward the lake, Jamie flailed in a jagged hole where the ice had given way, water up to his chest, fingers clawing at the crumbling edges. The thin ice around him fractured with every grab, widening the pool. Michael's body moved before his mind caught up. His brain recorded details anyway, the way it always had. Distance to target, thickness of ice, temperature of water, likelihood of hypothermia. It was just like every roadside ditch full of cold water he'd ever waded into with an orange trauma bag. "Jamie!" Nora screamed. "Michael, do something!" He reached the edge of the lake and skidded to a stop. The ice creaked under his boots. From here, one more step might send him through as well, and 2 bodies in the water were harder to pull out than one. Every training course he'd ever taken shouted in his head about scene safety, about not becoming a second victim. Another voice, older and crueler, whispered about a different patch of ice years ago, a different car, a different child he hadn't been able to drag back to the surface. Jamie's face went under for a second. When it came up again, his lips were already tinged blue. "Hold on!" Michael yelled. "Kick your legs! Keep moving!" He looked around wildly for a branch, a rope, anything. There was nothing within reach but rotten cattails and slush. Somewhere in the distance, a snowmobile engine buzzed, then cut. Rook shot past him in a blur of black. The animal didn't hesitate. He launched himself onto the ice, body low, claws digging in. Instead of running upright, he spread his weight, belly nearly skimming the surface, the way a wild thing does when it knows the ice can't be trusted. Every few feet the crust groaned, spiderweb cracks racing away from his paws, but he adjusted, shifting course without breaking speed. "Rook!" Michael shouted, terror flaring. "Back!" The dog ignored him. He slid the last few feet, braced himself at the edge of the hole, and clamped his jaws onto the back of Jamie's hood. The boy yelled as the fabric tightened around his throat, kicked blindly, splashing more water onto the ice. Rook dug in, muscles standing out along his shoulders, and pulled. It was slow, ugly work. The ice crumbled under Jamie's fingers. Rook lost his grip once, snapping at air, before finding cotton again. But inch by inch, the boy's body came up out of the water, belly scraping the ice, boots leaving wet streaks behind. When his chest cleared the edge, Michael surged forward, belly crawling the last distance, feeling the ice flex and complain under his own weight. "Gotcha," he grunted, grabbing Jamie under the arms. Together, man and dog dragged him far enough back that the ice stopped cracking and held. By the time they reached the shore, Jamie was shivering violently, teeth chattering so hard his words came out in broken pieces. Nora wrapped him in her coat, sobbing and scolding all at once, checking his fingers and toes like every TV doctor she'd ever watched. They bundled him into Michael's truck, cranked the heat, and drove him into town to be checked at the little clinic that handled everything short of real emergencies. The nurse on duty smiled kindly but firmly insisted on hot blankets and a couple of hours of observation. Nora fretted in the waiting room, muttering about hospital bills and whether her Medicare supplement would cover any of it. Michael sat in a hard plastic chair, one hand resting on Rook's head, replaying the scene on the lake again and again. That image of the dog sliding across the ice, choosing to go where any sane creature would back away, lodged itself in his chest like a stone. "You did good," he whispered, scratching behind Rook's ear. "Real good." A man in a snowmobile suit approached them a little later, holding up his phone. "Hey," he said, eyes wide. "You the guy with the black dog? I was out on the far side of the lake. I caught the whole thing on my GoPro, him going out on the ice, pulling that kid back. I sent the clip to my wife, and she told me to post it. Folks already love it. They're calling him a hero dog." Michael managed a thin smile. He earned it. On a small TV bolted to the corner of the waiting room ceiling, a local news channel ran ads between weather updates, one for a health insurance hotline, another for a personal injury lawyer promising to fight for every accident victim and every medical bill. It all felt very far away. Michael's world had shrunk to the boy behind the exam room door and the animal at his feet. 2 days later, the video hit a regional news site. By the end of the week, it had spread farther than Nora's gossip ever could. The headline read, "Minnesota Puppy Saves Boy from Icy Death." Strangers online wrote about angels in fur and how dogs were better than people. Somebody tagged a couple of animal rescue groups. Someone else mentioned the story under a clip about home safety and emergency preparedness. When Michael took Rook into town for his vaccinations the following week, people pointed and smiled. A teenager behind the counter at the feed store asked for a selfie. At the small veterinary clinic, the receptionist huddled with a tech over a tablet, replaying the rescue. "That's him," she whispered as Michael walked in. "That's the one from the video." The veterinarian on duty that afternoon wasn't the older man Michael remembered from years back. She was a woman in her 40s with dark hair pulled into a braid and tired, intelligent eyes. Her name tag read, Dr. Elena Morales. "So," she said, kneeling to let Rook sniff her hand, "you're the celebrity." She ran practiced fingers over his ribs, checked his teeth, listened to his heart. As she worked, her brow furrowed just slightly. "How old did you say he is?" she asked. "Maybe 5 months," Michael said. "Found him in the storm back in January. Best guess." "He's big for that," she murmured. "And these paws, this chest, I don't know. He doesn't look like any lab or shepherd mix I've ever seen." "Where did you say you got him?" "Didn't," Michael replied. "He sort of got me." Before she could say more, a metal tray in the next exam room slipped from a tech's hand and crashed to the floor with a bang. The sound was sharp enough to make everyone in the building flinch. Rook did more than flinch. In an instant, the easy resting animal was gone. He spun toward the noise, body coiling, lips peeling back from his teeth in a snarl Michael had never heard before. Not playful, not warning, but something cold and focused. He lunged 2 quick steps, nails scrabbling on the linoleum, every muscle aimed toward the open doorway. "Rook!" Michael barked, grabbing the leash with both hands. It went tight like a live wire. For a heartbeat, he felt the full force of Rook's weight and power on the other end, far more than any farm dog had a right to. Then, just as suddenly, the tension snapped. Rook froze, chest heaving, ears flicking back, as if he'd only now realized where he was. He backed up a step, then another, and leaned against Michael's leg, panting. Dr. Morales straightened slowly. Her eyes were no longer just curious. There was something like calculation in them now. "Mr. Carter," she said quietly, "I'd like to talk to you about running a DNA test on your dog." The swab itself took less than a minute. Dr. Elena Morales rubbed the cotton along Rook's gums, dropped it into a plastic tube, and labeled it with neat, careful handwriting. The whole time, Rook stood still, yellow eyes flicking between her and Michael, as if trying to decide whether this was just another shot or something else. "How long does that take?" Michael asked. "A few weeks," she said. "I've got a colleague working with a genetics lab that studies wolf populations in the Great Lakes and over in Europe. Since he's already running samples, I can slide this in without it costing you anything. No surprise bills from a health insurance plan you never signed up for." He almost smiled at that. Almost. "Do I want to know?" he asked. She hesitated. "If he's what I think he is, it could have consequences. For you, for him, for the state. But knowing is better than guessing." He signed the form. He'd spent his life believing information saved people. It seemed wrong to turn his back on it now. Weeks blurred, spring chewing away at the edges of winter. Ice broke up on Iron Lake, drifting in gray rafts before vanishing altogether. Mud replaced snow along the path to the road. Rook shed his thick winter coat in clumps, dark hair rolling like tumbleweeds across the porch. The video of the rescue on the lake kept traveling even after the ice was gone. One evening, Nora showed up with a casserole and her tablet. "You're famous," she announced, jabbing at the screen until a clip popped up. Local news anchors smiled over footage of Rook pulling Jamie across the ice. The banner at the bottom read, "Minnesota Hero Dog Saves Boy." "They called," Nora said, "wanted to talk to the brave grandfather. I told them you're too young for Social Security, but not by much." Michael shook his head. It was Rook. He's the brave one. The praise felt strange, like a suit that didn't quite fit. In the comments under the video, strangers from all over the country wrote about angels in fur, about how pets lower blood pressure and keep seniors out of hospitals. Someone mentioned updating their home insurance after watching. Another talked about setting aside money for emergency vet bills along with life insurance. People trusted the story. They trusted the dog. He tried not to think about Rook's howls on the lake or the fresh scar on his shoulder. The call from Elena came on a gray Thursday, the kind of day that smelled like rain and gasoline. "Can you come into town?" she asked. Her voice was steady but tight. Or better yet, "Would you mind if I drove out there? It's probably better we talk where we won't be overheard." He felt something cold settle behind his ribs. "That bad, huh?" "Not bad," she said. "Just complicated." She arrived. An hour later, her old Subaru crunching up the gravel drive. She had a folder under one arm, its edges soft from being handled. Rook greeted her with a wag and a careful sniff, then settled at Michael's feet as they sat at the kitchen table. Elena opened the folder and laid out a few pages, charts, colored bars, words that swam in front of Michael's eyes. She tapped a list of percentages. "I sent his sample to a lab that compares candid DNA against known populations," she said. "I expected to see some bright, shiny mix. Husky, shepherd, maybe a little Malamute. That's not what we got." She slid a different page toward him. Even he could read the bold type. Canis lupus. "That's wolf," he said quietly. "Not just wolf," she replied. "Great Lakes gray wolf, very high purity. They checked for domestic dog markers and barely found a trace. And then there's this." She pointed to another section, a string of numbers and letters he couldn't begin to parse. "These markers match an ancient lineage we've been seeing in a protected Scandinavian population," she said. "A remnant strain. Rare. Some of the conservation folks in Norway have been scrambling to keep it from disappearing. When they saw this, they got very interested." Michael stared at the papers. The words slid around, refusing to land. "You're telling me the dog that dragged a kid off my lake is what? Some kind of ancient wolf? In plain English?" Elena nodded. Yes, as far as genetics and the law are concerned, he's wildlife. A wild wolf with a very unusual background. Not a dog, not a pet. He let out a slow breath. Outside, the wind pushed against the cabin walls, making them creak like an old ship. "What does that mean for him?" he asked. "For us? It means," she said carefully, "that technically keeping him here is like keeping a wild bear in your living room. State regulations say he should be in a licensed facility, not sleeping on your rug. And because of that Scandinavian marker, some people overseas see him as a valuable research animal, a genetic resource." She flipped another page, this one an email printout. The logo at the top was a stylized wolf's head and a mountain. "They want us to send him to a research center in Norway," she said. "They're already talking about permits, quarantine, transport crates. They think he belongs to the wild, that he can help save a bloodline they've been fighting to protect." Michael stared at the little black and white emblem, at the polite words about conservation and global partnerships. The phrases blurred with other ones he'd heard over the years. Policy limits, coverage exclusions, phrases from accident lawyers on late-night TV promising to fight for every client. It all sounded the same. People who had never held this animal deciding what he was worth on paper. "He belongs here," Michael said softly. "He belongs with me." Elena's face softened. "I know you feel that way. I'm not saying I agree with them. I'm telling you what we're up against. And there's more." She reached into her bag and pulled out a tablet, opening a browser. A video thumbnail filled the screen. A still image of Rook on the ice, teeth buried in Jamie's hood, the boy half out of the water. Big red letters screamed across the top. "This hero dog is a ticking time bomb." "Who's that?" Michael asked. "His name's Caleb Ross," she said. "Runs a channel where he talks about predator attacks, livestock losses, that kind of thing. He grabbed your clip and spliced it with footage of wolves taking down cattle out west. Says letting a wild animal like this live near town is asking for trouble." She hit play for a few seconds. A man's voice rolled out, smooth and outraged, talking about complacent communities and government overreach. Caleb pointed at Rook's image, called him a loaded gun with fur, said if the state didn't act, some grieving farmer would hire an attorney and sue everyone in sight after the first attack. Michael felt his jaw tighten. "He doesn't know anything about us." "No," Elena agreed, "but he's loud, and people who are scared listen to the loud ones." As if on cue, there was a crunch of tires outside. A moment later, Hank Lawson filled the doorway without waiting for a knock, hat in his hands, face flushed with cold and anger. "You seen this garbage?" he demanded, waving his phone. "That wolf of yours is all over the internet. And last week I lost 2 calves. 2. Tracks all around the pen. And don't you tell me it was coyotes. Those prints were big." Michael stood up slowly. "You have photos?" Hank hesitated, then thrust the phone at him. The pictures were grainy, snow-trampled, a calf down in the mush, a dark shape just outside the fence line. In one shot, a paw print showed beside a boot. It was big, but not quite as big as Rook's. "I'm sorry about your calves," Michael said. "Truly, but you can't just assume—" "I can when there's a half-wild monster living up the road," Hank cut in. "Folks are scared, Carter. They see that video, they see that blog fella talking lawsuits and liability, and they start thinking about what happens when that thing decides a kid looks more interesting than a stick. You better figure this out before the state does it for you." When he was gone, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows, silence settled over the cabin like dust. Rook lifted his head from the rug, ears tilting, as if he had understood every word. Michael sank back into his chair. Elena watched him, her fingers drumming once on the edge of the folder. "This is the storm I was talking about," she said quietly. not the one that brought him to you. The one that's coming now." He looked down at the animal at his feet, the same creature that had warmed his chest through long nights and hauled a boy out of black water, the same one whose howl had braided itself into the voices of unseen wolves across the lake. From hero dog to ancient wolf, from blessing to liability, in a matter of weeks. "I'm not giving him up," Michael said at last, "not without a fight." Elena nodded slowly. "Then we need to be very sure we understand exactly what he is," she said, "because the next people who show up here won't be carrying a little DNA swab. They'll be carrying tranquilizer guns and legal papers." The trouble didn't come from the men on TV with ties and briefcases. It came from boys who still smelled like cheap beer and gasoline. In the weeks after the DNA news, Michael could feel the town tilt. At the feed store, conversations dropped when he walked in. At the diner, 2 farmers at the counter lowered their voices and glanced at him over their coffee cups. On the bulletin board by the door, someone had tacked up a printout from Caleb Ross's channel, a still shot of Rook on the ice beside a headline about dangerous predators in your backyard. Someone else had written "Hero" in shaky red pen above it. Underneath, another hand had scrawled, "Till he kills." Nora brought over a flyer one afternoon, lips tight. "Town meeting next week," she said. "They're talking about new rules for dangerous animals in residential areas. You know what they mean." Michael nodded, feeling the slow, familiar grind of worry in his chest. They'll use words like liability and public safety, and somebody will bring up hiring an attorney if anything goes wrong. You'd think we all had money for a personal injury lawyer sitting in a coffee can on the porch. "Some of them are scared," Nora said, softer. "Some just like being mad. It's easier than checking their life insurance and making peace with the fact that bad things happen anyhow." That night, Michael double-checked the latch on the gate and walked the fence line with a flashlight. The wire mesh and wooden posts circled the clearing like a rough necklace, enough to keep Rook close without making the place feel like a prison. The wolf, he was finally thinking the word, even if he never said it out loud, paced beside him, ears flicking, as if he could hear every worried thought. By midnight the cabin was dark. Rook settled on the rug, head on his paws. Michael lay in bed and listened to the night sounds, wind in the trees, the creak of settling logs, the occasional distant hum of a truck on the county road. His mind wandered to stray things, property taxes, the rising cost of health insurance, a pamphlet about home insurance discounts for security systems that had come in the mail that morning. All the human ways people tried to buy safety for themselves and the people they loved. He must have dozed, because the next sound tore him out of a shallow dream like a siren. Glass breaking. For a heartbeat he was back on the highway. But then another sound followed, laughter high and mean, and the slam of something hard against wood. Rook was on his feet before Michael's hand found the lamp switch, fur bristling, a deep growl rolling up from his chest. "Easy," Michael whispered, even as he grabbed his jeans and boots. "Stay with me." Outside, the yard was washed in jerky beams of flashlight. Shadows moved near the fence, long and jittery. Voices overlapped, boys trying to sound like men, slurring their words around cheap liquor and bravado. "Come on, you big bad wolf," one yelled. "Let's see how tough you are." Another laughed. A bottle smashed against a fence post, shards scattering in the snow. Michael stepped onto the porch, heart pounding. "Hey!" he shouted. "Get off my property!" 4 heads snapped his way. He recognized 2 of them from the diner. The third was Hank Lawson's boy, Tyler, his father's stubborn jaw softened by youth and beer. "Relax, mister," Tyler called. "We're just giving your pet monster a workout. Caleb says folks like you don't listen till something gets hurt." "Turn around and go home," Michael said. "Right now, before somebody calls the sheriff." "Already did," Nora's voice came from behind him. He started. He hadn't heard her truck. She stood at the corner of the porch in her robe and boots, phone in hand, hair wild from sleep. "You boys get your behinds off this land, or your daddies will be talking to more than just the county board. And no good lawyer is getting you out of trespassing." The boys hooted and jeered, but there was unease in the sound. One of them kicked at the fence anyway, boot connecting with the weakest post. The old wood shuddered. Another swung a length of rebar he must have pulled from some junk pile, gouging the mesh with a screech. Rook's growl deepened. He moved to the edge of the yard, staying just inside the line of the broken fence, body low, tail straight out. In the erratic flashlight beams, his eyes caught the light and flashed pale gold. "Look at that," Tyler crowed. "He's ready to go. Come on, beast, show us those famous teeth." He stepped closer than the others, the rebar hanging from one hand. The alcohol and the chorus of online voices behind his eyes told him he was invincible. "Don't you take one more step," Michael said, his tone dropping into the flat, command voice he'd used on accident scenes. Tyler hesitated. Pride won. He swung the rebar lazily toward Rook, not quite hitting him, the way a boy might tease a chained dog. Rook didn't snap. He didn't charge. He moved once, fast as a whip crack. The rebar glanced off his shoulder as he closed the distance, a glancing blow that would leave a bruise under the fur. Rook's body hit Tyler square in the chest, knocking him backward into the snow. The boy's phone flew from his hand, skidding across the yard. For one terrifying instant, Rook stood over. Him, paws planted on either side of the boy's shoulders, teeth bared inches from his throat. Tyler sucked in a breath that turned to a sob halfway out. "Get him off me! Get him off!" "Rook!" Michael shouted. Every muscle in the wolf's body was tense, the kind of coiled strength that could end a life in a heartbeat. His lips were peeled back, hot breath steaming in the cold air. But his teeth had not broken skin. He was holding the boy there, pinning him, not tearing. "Rook, with me," Michael said, forcing his voice steady. "Now." For a second, nothing moved. Then Rook flicked an ear, blinked, and stepped back. He turned and trotted to Michael's side, sides heaving, eyes still bright with adrenaline. Red and blue lights flickered at the edge of the trees as a sheriff's cruiser pulled up, tires crunching over the ruts. A younger deputy Michael didn't know climbed out, one hand near his holster, the other adjusting a body camera clipped to his chest. "What's going on here?" he demanded, taking in the broken fence, the scattered glass, the boy in the snow. "Kids trespassing," Nora said crisply. "Drunk, breaking things, tormenting an animal. You're lucky this man didn't have a shotgun and a short temper." The deputy herded the boys together, got their names, called for a second unit to run them home before their parents had time to call an attorney and make things worse. The whole time the small lens on his chest blinked in a slow, steady pattern, recording every raised voice, every flinch, every glimpse of Rook standing between Michael and the chaos. Later, after the cruisers had gone and the yard was quiet again, Michael fixed the fence as best he could in the dark. His hands shook more from anger than from the cold. "Feels like you can't even own a dog anymore without thinking about lawsuits and cameras," he muttered to Nora. "Used to be, a man fixed his own problems." "Times change," she said. "Now everybody's life is a show, and they'll take 10 seconds of footage over 10 years of knowing you." She was right. 2 days later, a clipped, shaky segment from the deputy's body cam turned up online. Rook over Tyler, teeth bared, the boy's scream cut off before anyone could see him walk away without a scratch. It played under a headline that asked whether the hero dog was finally showing his true colors. For the first time since the storm, when Michael looked at Rook lying in front of the stove, he could feel the ground shifting under them, the sense that the real danger wasn't in the woods, but in the eyes watching from screens he'd never see. The morning they came, the sky was too bright, the kind of hard, polished blue that always made Michael suspicious. Real trouble, in his experience, liked to show up under clear skies. Storms were just the warm-up act. He heard the engines before he saw the vehicles. More than one, heavy on the gravel. Rook was already at the window, ears forward, body rigid. By the time Michael stepped onto the porch, the little clearing in front of the cabin looked like a scene from a daytime news report. A white animal control truck, a green fish and wildlife pickup with the state seal on the door, the county sheriff's SUV, and behind them, a silver crossover with rental plates. Tires still carrying city dust. Doors opened. People climbed out. Sheriff Dugan led the way, hat low over his eyes, a folder tucked under one arm. 2 animal control officers followed, jackets zipped, tranquilizer guns slung but not yet raised. From the silver car stepped a woman in a dark coat, her blonde hair twisted into a tight knot, glasses flashing in the sun. She looked like every professional Michael had ever seen in hospital hallways and insurance offices, tidy, calm, already thinking 3 moves ahead. "Mr. Carter," she called. "That's me," he said, one hand resting on the porch rail, the other hovering just above Rook's neck. She offered a small, rehearsed smile. "I'm Dr. Ingrid Nilsson from the Nordic Wildlife Conservancy. We've been in contact with Dr. Morales about your animal." "Wolf," Michael said. His voice surprised him with how steady it sounded. "You can say it. Everyone else has." Elena's old Subaru slid in behind the official cars, gravel spitting. She climbed out quickly, hair escaping its braid, clipboard in hand. Nora's truck followed a minute later, Jamie in the passenger seat, face pale. The sheriff cleared his throat. "Mike, we need to talk." "Seems like that's what everybody wants to do these days," Michael replied. "Talk about my dog." "He's not a dog," one of the fish and wildlife men said under his breath. Ingrid stepped closer, careful, like she was approaching both a client and a bomb. "Genetically, he's a wild wolf of a protected line," she said. "Under state law, you're keeping a dangerous wild animal without a permit. Under international agreements, he's considered a valuable specimen for conservation. We're here with an order to transfer him to a secure facility." She opened a folder, slid out papers heavy with seals and signatures. Words leapt out at Michael: liability, public safety, indemnity, transport authorization. It read like a cross between a health insurance contract and a legal demand letter. Somewhere in there was language that would keep everybody covered if something went wrong. Everybody but him and Rook. "So that's it?" he asked. "You just show up with your forms and your tranquilizer guns and haul away the one thing that's keeping me from crawling back into a bottle?" "Mike," Sheriff Dugan said quietly, "you've seen the videos. You know what folks are saying. If that wolf hurts somebody, it's not just you in trouble. The county gets sued, the state gets sued. Some accident lawyer from the cities puts a commercial on TV, and suddenly everybody's talking about negligence and wrongful death. I've seen it too many times." Jamie stepped forward, voice cracking. "He saved my life. Twice. If you count all the times he makes me get off my phone and go outside. You can't just take him like he's a stolen car." Nora planted herself beside Michael, jaw set. "You people start caring this much about folks' medical bills and life insurance when they get cancer. Maybe I'll be impressed. Until then, don't pretend this is all about protecting us." Elena flipped her clipboard open. "There are other options," she said. "We could talk about a special permit, supervised study, increased fencing. Give us time to work something out." Ingrid's mouth tightened. "We've already delayed action once," she said. "After the body cam footage, after Mr. Lawson's calves, the risk assessment changed. If something happens now, it will be on record that we knew and did nothing. That's not acceptable for the Conservancy or the state. The animal control officers shifted their weight, fingers brushing the stocks of their guns. Rook watched them all, head low, eyes narrowed. A growl hummed in his chest, not loud, but deep enough that Michael could feel it in the boards beneath his boots. "Easy," Michael murmured. "Stay with me." One of the officers took a step toward the gate. Rook moved without thinking, placing himself squarely between the man and the porch, shoulders squared, tail stiff. The officer froze, eyes flicking to the sheriff. "Let's not make this harder than it already is," Dugan said. "Mike, call him back." Michael opened his mouth to answer, but the words never came. From the far edge of the clearing, where the tree line began, came a sound like someone ripping a sheet of canvas in half. Brush cracked. A low, furious grunt rolled across the yard. Every head turned. A massive black shape pushed out of the undergrowth, shoulders humped, muzzle slick with whatever it had been rooting through. A black bear, larger than anything Michael had seen this close, nostrils flaring as it caught the scent of garbage, fear, and noise, all tangled together. For a split second the world held its breath. Then the bear dropped to all fours and charged straight toward the cluster of people in front of the cabin. The bear came faster than anyone moved. 1 second it was a dark weight at the edge of the clearing. The next it was thundering over the ruts, head low, jaws open, all that muscle and hunger aimed straight at the knot of people between the trucks. Someone screamed. One of the animal control men fumbled with his tranquilizer gun, hands clumsy on the safety. Sheriff Dugan reached for his sidearm, then checked himself. Too many people in the way, too little time. The young animal control officer closest to the trash cans froze. Her eyes went huge, boots rooted to the spot. The bear locked onto that stillness and veered, coming straight for her. Rook moved. He launched, off the porch like a black arrow, a blur slicing across the pale ground. Michael barely saw his legs touch earth. One heartbeat the wolf was at his side, the next he was between the bear and the woman, teeth bared, fur standing on end. He didn't hit the bear head on. He angled in, slamming his shoulder into its flank, snapping at its face, forcing it to turn away from the frozen human and toward this new, loud threat. The bear roared, an ugly, ripping sound, and swung a paw the size of a dinner plate. Claws raked across Rook's ribs. Michael heard the impact from the porch, a thick, sickening thud, and felt the air leave his own lungs in sympathy. Rook staggered, then dug his paws into the dirt, jaws clamped on the bear's shoulder long enough to make it feel the pain. For a few endless seconds, it was chaos. A tangle of fur and snow and sound, the bear lunging, Rook darting in and out, always keeping its massive body pivoting away from the people, clustered by the trucks. The animal control officer scrambled back on hands and knees, boots slipping, eyes never leaving the fight. "Hold your fire," Dugan shouted, as one of the men raised his tranq gun. "You hit the wrong one. We're all in trouble." Rook feinted left, then rushed right, teeth snapping inches from the bear's eye. The big animal huffed, tossed its head, then seemed to think better of this whole business. With a final grunt, it turned and crashed back into the trees, branches thrashing as it shoved its way into the deeper woods. Silence slammed down over the clearing. Snowflakes drifted lazily in the space where death had just stood. Rook watched the trees for another heartbeat, chest heaving, then turned and limped toward the porch. Blood darkened his side where the claws had laid him open in 4 parallel lines. Michael dropped to his knees in the dirt, reaching out with shaking hands. "That's enough," he whispered. "You did it. That's enough." Rook pressed his head against Michael's chest and let his weight sink into him, leaving a smear of red on the front of his flannel. Up close, Michael could feel every tremor in the animal's muscles, every harsh breath. Behind him, the others started to move again, as if someone had flipped a switch and turned the world back on. "Everybody okay?" Sheriff Dugan called, his voice rough. The young officer by the trash cans nodded weakly, still clutching her radio like a life preserver. Dr. Ingrid Nielsen stepped forward slowly, glasses askew, her neat professional composure cracked around the edges. She stared at the bloody tracks in the snow, at the groove Rook's body had carved when he slammed into the bear. "If he hadn't been here," she said softly, more to herself than anyone else, "that animal would have been in the middle of us. We'd be filing health insurance claims and calling some personal injury lawyer right now instead of standing here." Nora snorted, half a laugh, half a sob. "Some of us wouldn't be standing at all." Jamie edged around the sheriff and came closer, eyes fixed on Rook. "He saved me on the lake," he said, "and he just saved all of you. That has to count for something." Elena knelt opposite Michael, her hands practiced and gentle as she examined the wounds. "These need stitches," she said, more briskly now that she had something she could fix. But the claws didn't go as deep as they could have. He moved just enough. "Story of his life," Michael murmured, stroking Rook's ears, "moving just enough." Ingrid looked from the wolf to Michael and back again. The papers in her hand fluttered slightly in the breeze. "The law is very clear," she began, then stopped. "But the law didn't stand between that bear and my staff." He did. Sheriff Dugan shifted his weight. "If you put in one of your reports that we removed the animal, and then a bear killed somebody out here next year, how's that going to look?" he asked. "How's a jury going to see that? Even the best life insurance policy doesn't help much with the guilt." One of the Fish and Wildlife men cleared his throat. "We might have more options than we thought," he said slowly. "Under research exemptions, field studies, controlled environments." Ingrid took off her glasses and wiped them on her sleeve, buying herself a few seconds. When she put them back on, she looked older, less like a visiting expert, and more like a tired person who'd just been reminded that not everything fit neatly into forms. "All right," she said quietly. "Here's what I'm prepared to propose." They gathered around the kitchen table an hour later, coffee mugs standing among the stacks of paper. Rook lay on a blanket by the stove, stitched and bandaged, sedative softening his edges. He watched them through half-closed eyes, ears flicking at the rise and fall of their voices. Ingrid drew a square on a blank sheet, then a rough circle around it. "This cabin and these acres become a designated field study site," she said, "fenced to a higher standard, with cameras and signs. He wears a GPS collar. Dr. Morales and her students document his behavior. We treat him as what he is, a wild animal who has chosen to live in the shadow of a human house." "And me?" Michael asked. "You become part of the study," Elena said, giving him a small, wry smile. "We already have grants for looking at how animals help with PTSD in veterans and first responders. People pay good money for therapy dogs and mental health counseling. We can add one very unusual case. It also means liability is shared," the sheriff added. "State, conservancy, university. Not just one man in a cabin trying to stand between his wolf and a town meeting." Ingrid tapped the paper. 18 months, she said. "After that, our board reviews. If there have been incidents, if he shows signs of aggression toward people, we revisit. A relocation. If not, we keep talking." It wasn't the clean victory Michael had wanted. It was a compromise, like most things that lasted. But when he looked at Rook, breathing slow by the fire, and at the faces around the table, Nora's stubborn chin, Jamie's hopeful eyes, Elena's steady gaze, it felt like a truce he could live with. "One condition," he said. "He doesn't go anywhere unconscious in a crate. If he ever leaves, I walk him to whatever plane you put him on. He deserves to know it's me letting him go." Ingrid nodded. "Fair," she said. "I'll put it in writing." A year later, the cabin no longer felt like a bunker. The new fence rose higher and straighter, the metal mesh humming softly when the wind hit it. Little cameras sat in weatherproof boxes on posts, their lenses blinking red at night. Graduate students pitched tents by the tree line in the summer, scribbling notes by lantern light, while Rook patrolled the perimeter, a shadow slipping between trees and fence. Michael had a new routine. Mornings started with coffee on the porch and a video call with a group of retired paramedics and firefighters scattered across the country, men and women talking about nightmares and bad calls and how to live with both. He'd finally filled out the forms for health insurance he kept ignoring, sat down with a counselor instead of trying to outrun the past. Nora teased him about Medicare brochures and senior discounts. He teased her about her stack of coupons and her habit of reading the fine print on every home insurance renewal. Sometimes, in the long light of a northern evening, he and Elena walked the fence line with a pair of students trailing behind, notebooks open. "He still goes to the edge," she said once, watching Rook pause where the yard met the woods. "He still listens for them." Beyond the last posts, in the deepening shadows, other shapes moved, wild wolves, their eyes catching the light just long enough to prove they were there. Rook lifted his head and howled, a long braided note that carried across the lake. The unseen pack answered, their voices twining with his. For a moment Michael's heart clenched. Every time he heard that call, he half expected Rook to find a gap and slip away, to vanish into the trees and become what his DNA said he was supposed to be. But as the echoes faded, Rook turned back. He loped along the inside of the fence, then trotted up the steps and dropped heavily at Michael's feet, head on his boots, as if to say, "That's my world. This is my home." One evening, as the first hint of fall sharpened the air, an email chimed on Michael's old laptop. It was from Ingrid Nielsen. The Conservancy Board, she wrote, had voted unanimously to extend the field study until further notice. The data they were getting was priceless, the story of a wolf and a man living at the edge of each other's worlds, too important to cut short. She asked, politely this time, whether they might use Rook's story in their education programs to talk about wildlife, yes, but also about the way connection could change both animal and human lives. Michael read the message twice, then looked down at the scarred, sleeping animal by his chair. He'd thought he was rescuing a puppy from a snowstorm that night on the County Road. Months later, the most terrifying thing hadn't been the wolf in his living room, or the bear in his yard, or even the officials with their papers and guns. It had been the realization that when that wild heart chose to stay, he had run out of excuses to stop living. He reached down and laid his hand on Rook's back, feeling the slow, steady rise and fall under his palm, the powerful calm that had once been a shaking, frozen bundle of fur. "Guess we're both stuck here now," he said softly, "between the wild and home." Rook's tail thumped once against the floor, as if in agreement. Outside, somewhere beyond the fence, a wolf called. This time, Rook didn't answer. He just shifted a little closer, as if the storm he'd been born into had finally passed. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Before you scroll away, tell me this. Do you believe a bond like theirs could really exist? If this story touched your heart, drop a 1 in the comments so I know you're still with me. And don't forget to subscribe, because the next story might just remind you that sometimes the wild loves us back in ways we'll never forget.